Atlanta's Greyhound station was buzzing with the usual noise of impatience and exhaust fumes. The summer heat stuck to people's skin like syrup. The line to board the long-distance bus stretched past the vending machines, and tempers were thin. As the final passengers boarded, an elderly man shuffled toward the steps. His clothes hung loosely on his thin frame, a faded corduroy blazer over a stained t-shirt, torn slacks held up by a fraying belt. His shoes were barely intact. His salt and pepper beard was overgrown, his face lined with sun and time. A sour smell trailed behind him. Sweat, damp cloth, something older still. People turned away as he climbed aboard. Kimberly and Darren, a well-dressed young couple in their early 30s, were next aboard. Kimberly froze. No, I'm not sitting next to that," she whispered loudly to her husband, staring at the old man now seated alone in the back row. "Sir," Darren called to the driver, "do we really have to sit near him? I mean, can't you ask him to take the next one?" The driver shot them a tired look. "This ain't a private jet. Seats are seats. Take one." Others hesitated behind them. A middle-aged woman clutched her purse tighter as she stepped past the old man. A teenager made a gagging sound. Someone muttered, "He's probably homeless or drunk or worse." Through it all, the old man said nothing. His eyes stayed low, his mouth a hard line. He clutched a battered duffel bag close to his chest, the fabric fraying at the seams. On the side, scrawled in faded marker, was a name, Ellis Rayfield. Toward the middle of the bus, 16-year-old Raya slipped into her seat quietly. She wasn't like the others. Too curious, too observant. Her mum always said she had an old soul. Raya noticed how the man didn't flinch when insulted. He didn't defend himself or ask for help. He just sat, like he'd done it 100 times before. She leaned down, pulled out her phone, and typed the name into her browser. Ellis Rayfield. A few seconds passed, and then her heart stopped. She blinked, then clicked again. The screen filled with old newspaper clippings, courtroom photos, interviews. Raya's eyes widened. She looked up slowly, toward the back of the bus, at the dirty old man nobody wanted to sit beside. Her voice barely escaped her lips. "Oh my God." Years before Ellis Rayfield became the silent figure hunched in the back of a hot Georgia bus, his name was spoken with reverence in courtrooms across the South. In the grainy tint of old black and white photos, he stood tall in worn suits, face defiant, hand gripping the edge of a podium. He argued passionately before judges who didn't want to hear from men like him. In 1968, he got 2 teenagers freed from death row after proving the police had fabricated confessions. In 1971, he sued a rural sheriff's department for systemic brutality and won, despite threats, boycotts, and burning crosses on his lawn. The press called him the Lion of Fulton County. He called himself a servant of truth. Ellis turned down a state judgeship twice, insisting his place was beside the ones nobody else wants to stand beside. He married the love of his life, Lenora, a schoolteacher with soft hands and a sharp tongue. Together they built a home filled with books and laughter. They had one son, Marcus. For a while, everything felt like it would last forever, but it didn't. Lenora died quietly one winter morning after a brutal year of cancer. Ellis had exhausted every cent they had trying to keep her comfortable. Marcus, bitter from watching his inheritance shrink, erupted months later when he learned Ellis had donated the last of their savings to a legal aid center downtown. "You gave it all away, to people you don't even know." Ellis had looked at his son then, tired but unwavering. "I knew them better than you think." Marcus left that day and never returned. Years passed. Ellis stopped practicing law when his eyesight began to fade. The house went next, swallowed by unpaid bills and medical debt. His small pension dissolved. He didn't ask for help, didn't tell anyone. He just disappeared from public life. Now, at 78, he carried what remained of his legacy in that frayed duffel bag. Letters, photos, a yellowing speech he'd been asked to give at the memorial of Devonte McMillan, a former client Ellis had defended 20 years ago. Devonte had been executed after an appeals court denied their final motion. The pain of that case never left Ellis. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he hadn't slept a full night since that phone call. He wasn't traveling for glory. He wasn't hoping for forgiveness. He just needed to speak. One last time. Farther up the bus aisle, Raya stared at the news clipping on her phone. Civil rights attorney speaks truth to power. A grainy photo of Ellis, younger, but the same eyes, full of fire and sorrow. She scrolled through old op-eds, video transcripts, and trial notes preserved online. She knew his name. She had read about Ellis Rayfield during Black History, just a paragraph in her history textbook. But those words hadn't made her heart beat faster like it was now. This man wasn't a chapter. He was alive, right here. Raya tucked her phone into her lap. She thought about her mother, who worked 2 jobs and still found time to teach her respect, resilience, and how to look beyond appearances. Raya had always been the kind to ask why before judging. This morning, she'd boarded the bus for a school debate competition in Montgomery. She had no idea the real lesson would come, sitting just rows behind her. Her teammates were still grumbling about the smell, the crazy old man, joking behind cupped hands. But Raya, she looked back again, eyes locking on the figure slumped by the window, alone, forgotten, unbothered by the cruel murmurs. He had once been a lion, and nobody seemed to remember. The bus jolted over a pothole as it merged onto the freeway, the old vehicle groaning with age and heat. The air was thick and stale, the AC barely humming. Most passengers sat with their arms crossed or faces turned toward the window, trying to ignore the unpleasant smell that wafted from the back. A man in his 40s, balding and loud, leaned over to his seatmate and smirked. "I swear, that guy smells like death itself." The laughter started in pockets. A teenage boy snorted soda through his nose. Another woman turned to cover her nose dramatically. "Why doesn't someone ask him to take a shower before riding in public?" someone muttered behind her. Through it all, Ellis Rayfield didn't blink. He sat hunched near the window, the heat pressing against his back like a weight. His eyes drifted to the trees speeding past, green blurs that reminded him of Selma marches and restless nights in Mississippi jail cells. He'd heard worse than laughter. He'd faced worse than judgment. He let them talk, but Raya couldn't. She sat still, heart pounding in her chest. The more she scrolled, the deeper the story went. Time magazine, 1983. A cover story titled "The Law and the Legacy." There he was, in the center, younger, but unmistakably him, eyes full of purpose. She clicked another link. Rayfield v. State of Alabama, the landmark case that forced state police to adopt body camera protocol. Another. In 1974, he represented the Reverend Josiah King after the riot at East Point Church. It was impossible. Raya turned to her teacher across the aisle, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Gladstone." Mrs. Gladstone looked up from her crossword. "I think that man in the back is Ellis Rayfield." The teacher squinted. "Who?" "Ellis Rayfield, the civil rights lawyer. I found him in our textbook last semester. He's on Time magazine's cover. He fought all these huge cases." Gladstone leaned over, taking Raya's phone. Her eyes widened as she scrolled. "Oh my God," she said under her breath. More laughter from the front of the bus interrupted them. The bald man again. "I think something died in his bag. What's he got in there?" "A possum carcass." This time, Raya couldn't stay silent. "Stop it," she snapped, standing suddenly. Heads turned. "That man is Ellis Rayfield," she said. "He's not homeless. He's a hero. He's in history books." A ripple of confusion passed through the bus. Mrs. Gladstone stood too, smoothing her skirt, the calm in her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. She walked slowly to the back of the bus and knelt by Ellis's seat. "Sir," she said gently, "I don't mean to intrude, but are you Ellis Rayfield?" The old man's eyes turned to her for the first time since the ride began. They were tired, worn thin from years and losses. He nodded once, slow and deliberate. "Yes," he said quietly, "that used to be me." And just like that, silence fell over the bus like a heavy blanket. Even the engine seemed to hum softer. The passengers stared, not at a dirty old man anymore, but at someone they had laughed at, judged, humiliated. Now he had a name. Now he had history. And suddenly, they were ashamed. The silence on the bus had stretched into a quiet tension, heavy with guilt and confusion. Some passengers sat stiffly, eyes darting toward the back where Ellis now sat upright, his presence transformed. Others stole glances, unsure whether to say something or continue pretending they hadn't laughed. Kimberly leaned toward Darren, her arms folded tightly across her chest. "That can't be him," she whispered. "I mean, look at him. He looks homeless." Darren frowned, but didn't respond. He kept his gaze forward, as if the air around them had shifted, and he didn't quite know how to breathe in it. Raya stood slowly, the phone still in her hand. Her voice quivered as she read from the screen. He lost his home 2 years ago to a predatory refinancing scam linked to a fake banking firm. The firm defrauded over 200 elderly homeowners across Georgia. Ellis Rayfield testified in Congress, but by then, the damage had been done. Heads turned again. This time, no one dared speak. She kept reading. He used his pension to pay for legal counsel for those who couldn't afford it. When asked why he gave away nearly all his retirement savings, he said, "Because justice shouldn't be a privilege of the rich." Gasps echoed through the aisle. Mrs. Gladstone moved closer to Ellis, taking the seat beside him. "Mr. Rayfield, if you're comfortable, would you mind sharing your story?" Ellis gave her a long, tired look. Then, after a breath, he nodded. "Why not? Maybe the ride will pass faster this way." He turned slightly, speaking not with anger, but with clarity. "I was born in 1947, grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. First time I got arrested was for drinking from the wrong fountain. I was 9. A few people chuckled nervously, not because it was funny, but because it wasn't. I became a lawyer because I got tired of watching people like my father, good men, being dragged out of their homes for things they didn't do. I didn't want revenge. I wanted rules to mean something, so I fought for people who didn't have the money to fight for themselves." His voice softened. "My wife, Lorna, was the backbone of my world. She stood by me even when death threats came, even when I missed anniversaries to be in courtrooms across the country. She died of ovarian cancer 20 years ago. After that, the house felt like a grave. No one moved. Even the teenagers had put their phones down. My son, Marcus, well, he didn't agree with the choices I made. Thought I gave too much away. We argued. Haven't spoken since Lorna's funeral. I suppose he wanted me to stop helping strangers and start taking care of myself, but that's not how I'm built." Tyrone, the man who'd made the "smells like death" joke, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He looked down at his hands. Ellis noticed and nodded gently. "It's all right. I've heard worse." "No, sir," Tyrone said, voice low. "I thought you were just some bum. I didn't know. I didn't even try to know." Ellis gave a faint smile. "That's the problem with the world now, son. Everybody got a label ready before they even ask your name." Raya moved closer. "Mr. Rayfield, do you regret it? Helping so many people, even when they forgot you?" The old man looked at her, really looked at her, the kind of gaze that seemed to peel back your soul and see the good in it anyway. "Never," he said. "Not once. People will forget names, faces, accolades. But the impact, the justice you carve out of cruelty, that stays. It's in the laws they write. It's in the buildings that don't get bulldozed. It's in the bones of this country." A few people wiped their eyes. One young man reached up and quietly turned off his earbuds. Raya held up her phone. "Would it be okay if I record this part? I want my generation to hear it. We read history, but we don't always feel it." Ellis paused, then nodded. "Go ahead, child. Just tell it right." She hit record. Her voice cracked as she asked, "What kept you going all those years, when it felt like the world didn't care?" He chuckled. "Lorna, my faith, and the face of every client who hugged me after we won, or cried with me after we lost. I didn't fight for praise. I fought so one less boy would grow up in a jail cell that should have been a classroom." The bus rolled on, the city passing by unnoticed. A quiet reverence had settled over the passengers. They weren't just on a ride anymore. They were sitting in the presence of someone who had shaped history with his bare hands and battered heart. And for the first time, they really saw him. At the next bus stop, the air shifted. The brakes hissed, the doors folded open, and a group of sharply dressed men stood waiting just beyond the curb. They weren't the usual crowd. Their suits were crisp. Their shoes shined. The lead man, tall and distinguished with silver at his temples, scanned the bus, then climbed aboard in a hurry. "Ellis!" he called, his voice breaking into a smile. Heads turned in unison as he moved down the aisle and embraced the old man sitting at the back. "We thought you weren't coming, sir," he said, with warmth and reverence. Ellis blinked in surprise. "Stephen?" The man turned to the stunned passengers. "Judge Stephen Clark," he introduced himself, though few on that bus didn't already recognize the name. Nominated to the US Supreme Court just 3 weeks ago, his face had been on every national news program. "This man," Clark continued, gesturing to Ellis, "is the reason I ever believed I belonged in law. He paid for my LSAT classes when I couldn't afford them. Gave me my first internship when no firm in Atlanta would hire a young black kid from the South Side. When I got my first death threat, he didn't just give me advice. He drove to my house and sat with me until the sun came up. Gasps fluttered around the bus like whispers on the wind. Clark's voice grew more emotional. Ellis Rayfield has mentored more judges, more civil rights lawyers, and more public defenders than anyone I know. Without him, many of us wouldn't be here. And if I'm lucky enough to be confirmed to the Supreme Court, I want this country to know it's because of him. The silence was thunderous. Then a ripple moved through the bus. Heads nodding, hands covering mouths, eyes filling with tears. One of the other suited men stepped forward. "Mr. Rayfield, we've got a car ready for you, air-conditioned. We'd be honored to have you ride with us to the memorial. You'll be speaking, of course." Ellis smiled gently, the corners of his weathered face softening. "I appreciate that," he said, "but I think I'll stay right here." Clark blinked. "You're sure?" Ellis nodded. "I started this ride with them. I'll finish it." And that was that. As the men exited, the atmosphere inside the bus shifted completely. The tension dissolved, replaced by something warm and reverent. Passengers who had once recoiled now leaned forward, extending bottles of water, fresh napkins, apologies whispered with sincere regret. Kimberly approached, eyes down. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Rayfield. I judged you without knowing anything. I feel ashamed." Ellis placed a weathered hand on hers. "Judgment's easy. Compassion takes practice. At least now you're practicing." Tyrone came over, handing Ellis a sandwich he'd been saving. "I ain't got much, but you've given more than I ever will. Least I can do." Ellis chuckled and nodded in thanks. Raya slid into the seat beside him, her phone in hand. "It's already got over 60,000 views," she whispered. "People are sharing it everywhere. You're trending." Ellis blinked. "Trending?" She laughed. "It means the world is finally listening." He glanced out the window. "Well, maybe they'll hear something worth remembering." By the time the bus began moving again, it was no longer just transportation. It had become a sanctuary, a confessional, a history lesson rolling down the highway. And as they traveled on, Ellis Rayfield, once invisible, now seen, leaned back, his eyes closed, the rhythm of the road beneath him. No bitterness, no regret, just the quiet, enduring dignity of a man who'd never needed a title to change the world. The days that followed moved like a quiet storm, slow at first, then everywhere all at once. The video of Ellis Rayfield sitting silently on the bus, being approached by Judge Stephen Clark, and later offering words of dignity and grace, spread like wildfire. It appeared on morning talk shows, evening news segments, and late-night monologues, Twitter threads, Instagram reels, TikToks. The world saw it not as a scandal, but a mirror. News outlets picked up the story with headlines like "Forgotten Civil Rights Hero Reemerges on City Bus" and "Humility in Motion, the bus ride that stunned a nation." A local channel aired interviews with the bus driver who admitted, "I didn't even realize who he was. I was just trying to keep the peace. But that man, he carried more strength in silence than anyone I've met." Passengers came forward too, their voices tinged with shame but hope. Kimberly appeared on a podcast saying, "I judged him in seconds, and now I'm trying to unlearn that instinct. He changed me without saying a word." But it was Raya who became a symbol in her own right. The 16-year-old's voice, clear, trembling with emotion, as she asked Ellis whether he regretted helping people, had struck a chord with millions. "She saw what none of us did," one teacher wrote online. "Not because she's special, but because she listened." Within a week, Raya received multiple scholarship offers. A local civil rights museum invited her to intern. Even a senator's office reached out to schedule a Zoom meeting. But the moment that meant most to her came quietly. An envelope delivered to her school with no return address, just a handwritten note inside. "The future is safe with eyes like yours." E.R. Ellis himself remained mostly quiet through it all. He didn't want interviews, refused TV appearances. He let the moment pass like a breeze. He wasn't interested in becoming a celebrity. The work, he'd always believed, spoke for itself, even when no one was listening. But one message did reach him, a text from an unfamiliar number. "Dad, I saw you on the news. I cried. I didn't know you were still fighting." It was Marcus. They met at a quiet diner on the edge of town, the same one they used to go to after church before everything fell apart. No cameras, no microphones, just chipped coffee cups and the hum of a jukebox in the corner. Ellis walked in slowly, spotted Marcus at the booth. The years showed on both their faces, but when their eyes met, there was no anger, just time, finally caught up. Marcus stood, hesitant. Ellis opened his arms. No speeches, no grand apologies, just a hug. And the words Marcus whispered into his father's shoulder. "I didn't know you were still fighting." Ellis held him tighter. Always was. Outside the diner, the sky stretched wide and soft, the way it does after rain. The world would move on soon, as it always did. But for once, it had paused long enough to remember a man whose name wasn't etched on buildings or street signs, but on the hearts of those he lifted when no one else would. And somewhere on a city bus seat, long since cleaned and claimed by another rider, the echo of that dignity remained. The sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Ellis sat on the bench, the same bench he had rested on between trials decades ago. His hands, weathered but steady, held a small paper cup of coffee. His clothes were clean, simple, a pressed button-down, slacks and polished shoes that had seen too many miles. He was clean-shaven now, his hair combed neatly back, but his eyes carried the same quiet weight they always had. Raya approached, holding a manila folder close to her chest. She sat beside him, smiling as she opened it. Inside were photocopies of trial records, newspaper clippings, and a black-and-white image of Ellis at a podium, fire in his eyes. "I printed these," she said softly, "from the library archives. You were incredible." Ellis chuckled, eyes fixed on the courthouse steps ahead. "I was young, angry, full of words. You changed things," she said. He nodded once, then took a slow sip of his coffee. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. Ellis paused, then shook his head. Not the courtroom, not the arguments or the long nights prepping cases. He turned to her, a gentle smile forming. "But the people, the ones we believed in, even when the world didn't. That's what I miss." Raya looked down at the documents in her lap, then back at him. "I want to do what you did. Help people." He leaned closer. "Then don't just help them. See them. Fight for them before anyone knows their name. Before they trend. Before they're safe bets." She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Ellis looked out again, the courthouse glowing gold in the late afternoon sun. "Now it's your turn to believe in them," he said quietly. The camera slowly pulled back, capturing them in wide frame. The old man and the young girl, history and hope, past and future. They sat together in silence, side by side, not needing words. Legacy, passed without ceremony, only trust. Hi besties, thank you so much for watching to the end. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe.